Hello everyone, I'm Scott Plyler, the chairman of SWAPA's Schedule Research Committee, and our pilot's been asking about the whats and the whys our operation melted down this past Christmas. Flight Operations has repeatedly said that they've been consulting with SWAPA during this entire time, but the truth of the matter is that we've only got a pre-briefing of the operation on December 20th, and we had one phone conversation on Thursday after Christmas just to kind of explaining what they thought had happened. We really haven't had any opportunity to collaborate on helping with the recovery solutions. So right now this timeline is simply our assessment of what actually happened based on the data we receive, the phone calls and the emails that we've gotten from all of you, and just our general knowledge of how the system works over at Southwest Airlines. Clearly there are systemic issues within flight operations and also within the NOC that need to be addressed. Some of these are leadership processes and others are technology issues. I'm sure you're all aware, and we'll get into those. The bottom line is there's a lot of key points that we can take away and we'll explain those in this video. So let's start with the Tuesday before the storm. SWAPA SRC met with crew planning and crew scheduling in our regular monthly meeting, and as part of that we discussed some of the operational issues that were coming up. There was certainly some concern about the weather, and they were already talking about doing some large cancellation packages for later in the week due to weather in Denver and Chicago. This is a good idea because the further out we make these changes, it's much easier to recover the network. There's a lot more time involved, a lot more options involved. This brings us to key point number one. Dispatch does all of the cancellations and reassignments of aircraft and passengers via an optimizer called the Baker. Unfortunately, the Baker doesn't have a whole lot of inputs that deal with crew and crew recoverability. So what happens is the Baker and dispatch will create a recovery package based on how many cancellations they have, and then they send that to crew and in-flight scheduling to actually crew the recovery. That's where SKYSOLVER comes in. Just to be clear though, SKYSOLVER is used independently in in-flight and pilot scheduling, so because they have different work rules to account for, it's actually two separate crew recovery solutions that are made. This brings us to our next point, where SKYSOLVER can only handle up to 2, maybe 300 solutions at a time. That's okay for this initial scenario for Denver, because they had more than 24 hours to process these changes. A SKYSOLVER run might take upwards of 20 to 30 minutes, but if they can process all these cancellations in chunks, where they solve 200 to 300 at a time, then another 200 to 300 issues, and then another 200 to 300. So the initial plan to do cancellations early is in fact a good plan. Unfortunately, as you see on the line, when we do have multiple iterations in SKYSOLVER, you'll have pilots getting drawn into multiple solutions and your schedule will be changed multiple times, and this can cause some wonky things like multiple deadheads, deadhead only duty periods, things like that. To be clear though, we've known for years that there are some of these internal problems with SKYSOLVER that we have requested to be addressed, but do realize that when they are overloaded with the number of cancellations, it exacerbates the known problems within SKYSOLVER. Okay, so now let's return back to the timeline. So as we got into Wednesday, Flight Operations put out a memo saying that there would not be any base closures, and in fact the cancellation package delivered to crew scheduling wasn't as robust as was initially envisioned. Unfortunately, by Wednesday night, it became apparent that this was an overly optimistic assessment of the operation as Denver went into a complete whiteout. I know many of you were stuck there waiting for hours trying to get to gates. Ground operations crews were having difficulty covering flights, understandably, and it caused a lot of misconnects and illegality issues for crews that then now had to be thrown into the SKYSOLVER process. As we got into Thursday, we started to see additional cancellations coming from the NOC. So crew scheduling was not only dealing with the outcome from the night before and the illegalities and misconnects, but now they had additional cancellations that they needed to process. This makes things very difficult, especially close in, so because SKYSOLVER doesn't have the available options to connect crew with the aircraft. This kind of comes full circle again as we get into Friday. The discussion about Baker becomes particularly relevant. We have additional cancellations coming in close in from the knock, and Baker is creating these solutions that are really pretty for aircraft and passengers, but they're doomed ultimately because the crew network wasn't taken into account, and therefore we can't actually crew the solution. You can see these close-in cancellations in the chart here in red. Those are ones that were done at or after scheduled departure time. You can see how those increased going into Thursday and later into Friday. The bottom line is that short notice cancellations actually kill SKYSOLVER and kill the crew network. So as dispatch issued more and more cancellation packages at or after departure time going into the weekend, those short notice cancellations hampered SKYSOLVER's ability to even generate a usable solution, and therefore it required even more manual reroutes by schedulers just to try to cover part of the schedule and created even further strain on scheduling. Obviously, you weren't able to get a hold of schedulers on the phone, partially because they were trying to manually call and make these changes because we know we can't acknowledge a change the day of. And they were also trying to manually go through solutions because SKYSOLVER wasn't able to get to a solution to recover the short notice uncovered flying. So as you can see, the SkySolve pairings kept having to be redone and redone and redone, and ultimately some manual reroute had to happen. As we got into Friday afternoon, Flight Ops put out a memo saying that they were going to start awarding premium open time, prior to assigning reserves. The problem is that when you try to use incentives, you need to do this early and communicate it early in order to get pilots out there. Some people may try to blame a drop in open time participation on why part of this happened. Well, certainly it's the holidays and everybody expects open time participation to go down a little bit. But in the days preceding this, on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and even for Friday's original pairings, there were pilots that were bidding for premium that were not awarded, and it was assigned to reserves. So there were willing pilots out there, but by the time they started awarding premium automatically, it was too little too late. As we got into Saturday and then into early Sunday, dispatch continued to process additional waves of cancellations. The problem here is that crew scheduling was trying to tell them they couldn't handle any more cancellations, or they needed a slower rate because they weren't able to process and crew the cancellations prior in time to even, and they were never able to get caught up until Sunday morning, and then they had another cancellation package happen. So we get into the spiral where you have passenger aircraft solutions driving the need for crew solutions. The crew solutions can't handle those, so then they have to create new aircraft and passenger solutions with Baker, and it goes back and forth between dispatch and scheduling, and we eventually wind up where it's hard to track where anybody actually is. It basically came down to you have a lot of pilots that, because of the reassignment rate, we get to where Chatnock, our hotel desk, cannot process where pilots need to be, get them hotels, and that creates even further legality and rest issues as pilots aren't actually able to get into rest in a timely manner, causing additional failures of the crew network, which drives failures of the aircraft network. As it was, we know that a lot of our pilots wound up not having hotels, having to be able to procure their own hotels, and some even having continuous duty overnights. We estimate that close to 1,000 pilots had executed duty days of greater than 15 hours over the course of this event. It's also concerning that we estimate over 350 pilots were assigned pairings that wound up ending with a limo in a place other than their domicile. This is probably because scheduling finally was able to catch up with them, and instead of trying to get them back to a domicile with the chaos going on, they just released the pilots to their own devices at that point. Lastly, we saw fatigue pulls absolutely spike, close to 100 per day for several days during the Christmas weekend. Not directly related to crew scheduling, but we also had pilots started to report that crew lists provided by ops agents coming out of Ops Suite contained wildly inaccurate information. They had flight attendants shown as working certain flights in CWA were not listed on those flights in Ops Suite. There seemed to be several hour delay in getting talking between the CSS system and crew scheduling and Ops Suite, which caused you to have to delay your flights even further, trying to figure out what crew was supposed to be on your flight, where the flight attendants from your crew list were, and then you were able to just manually pen and ink a change. You had to get a hold of crew scheduling or in-flight scheduling to figure out who actually was supposed to be on the flight. So this further compounded the delays and the misconnects further down line. All of these are really just the final ugly outcomes of the breakdown between dispatch and scheduling and the long time and well-known limitations of both Baker and Solver. So all of this turned into what all of you know was losing the bubble in the operation. We had issues crewing flights, not because we didn't have flight attendants or pilots available. We weren't able to actually connect them onto the flight using the software that we had, or we had pilots sitting in hotels that were unable to be assigned. The worst part about this is that we had over 500 flights that got ferried around during this time without passengers on board. However, we sure had a lot of deadheading crew members. That is the worst feeling, to leave a gate and fly a flight segment to a city without the passengers sitting in the gate area that wanted to go to that city, all because we didn't have the technology to be able to handle that, even though we had crew, pilots and flight attendants available, sitting in lounges, sitting in hotels. As fallout from the weekend, on Monday, Southwest announced that they were going to significantly thin out the schedule through Thursday the 29th. The majority of these started being labeled as crew cancellations, even though there were crew out in the system able to fly a lot of these flights. We want to be totally clear with leadership at Southwest that there were crews available. We were just not able to connect them to the existing flights. It's unclear if there were any system glitches with SKYSOLVER that created the need to cancel this many flights, but seeing how the system operated well on the reduced subsequent days, this seems very unlikely. Those flights were able to be crewed and covered. As part of the recovery, the company put out a message that they were going to cancel all flights that were uncrewed, whether it was partially crewed, fully crewed, which added to the total number of cancellations. Moving into Tuesday, our new COO, Andrew Watterson, put out some communication about our crew scheduling issues of having to manually route pilots, given the reported issues with Solver's optimizations and the multiple waves of cancellations. This is a significant admission that they actually saw the problem of the massive waves of cancellations overwhelming SKYSOLVER. The question is what will be done in the next 6 to 12 months or even sooner to address this. As expected, because of all the cancellations, we had a significant number of pilots having deadhead only or limoed duty periods during the next several days, ranging between 1,000 to 2,500 deadheads each day, and hundreds of pilots just staying in the hotels for duty periods. The key point here being, and what is frustrating for you all, is that we had hundreds of pilots out on the line that were not able to be used. And again, it just goes towards the breakdown of our technology and our scheduling systems, but also the processes within the NOC and regarding crew as part of the solution process. In the summary, we haven't even begun to talk about some of the other issues, with the processes and technology issues that some of our other work groups are having, such as our CSAs and our ops agents, being able to have accurate passenger counts, being able to rebook passengers that are actually standing there at the gate waiting to get on your flight and you were willing to wait for. Problems with CSAs even be able to talk to their SOS help desk. They were having similar issues not getting through, just like you were having problems getting through to scheduling. SWAPA's SRC has warned that other departments treat crew scheduling and crew planning as an afterthought. Network planning waits until the very last minute to send final flight schedules to crew planning, which then has minimal time to even build the bid lines, let alone optimize them for things that, pilot and quality of life issues. And also see that where dispatch sends close-in cancellations and large packages and just assumes that crew scheduling is going to be able to handle that. Unfortunately, we also see an attitude of martyrdom in some of those departments and pushing back. They'd rather have warrior spirit and battle through it than advocate for themselves as well as for pilots. And that's unfortunate because pilots' quality of life suffers as well as the airline's ability to recover from disruptions. It's really odd that Southwest Airlines spent so much money building that huge NOC and included scheduling. They brought scheduling floor into the NOC, and yet crew scheduling and in-flight scheduling are not considered an equal partner in that relationship. SWAPA has repeatedly, expressed our concerns about even just the internal products, for SKYSOLVER, the interconnectivity of different programs, and creating new processes that will help not just on day-to-day operations, but when we do have these massive disruptions, how do we keep the airline on track? Sadly, as of this recording, a week and a half later, SWAPA has still not been invited to be in any of the post-mortem discussions on how this went down, the lessons learned, and how we can invest in our operation, in our processes, in our technology, in order to prevent this from happening again. We feel that we have a very unique view on the operation. You all see the operation the way it is. We interact with CSAs, we interact with ops agents, we interact with the ground ops, we interact with flight attendants, and we see how the operation actually works. Unfortunately, because we're still not being included, we had to put all of these kind of proposals into our contract 2020 negotiations. We are advocating for major changes in how the operation is run from planning to execution, not just for pilots' quality of life, which is certainly our main concern, but also because it makes sense for the operation. I hope this video has given you a little clearer look into a lot of the causal factors into the meltdown over Christmas, and we thank you for flying a safe operation over this time.